Sometimes, the biggest stories hinge on the smallest things: a forgotten note, a misplaced key, or a flimsy parking ticket. This ticket, issued on a cold Tuesday, became more than a nuisance. It became the voice of a woman who could no longer speak for herself. It unraveled a carefully constructed story and challenged how our legal system understands fear, aggression, and self-defense. This is the story of Rosa Delgado, a nurse whose life was cut short, and how a single slip of paper rewrote the law. Justice isn't always found in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the mundane details: a timestamp, a receipt, a parking ticket. Before this case, self-defense claims often rested on a subjective feeling: fear. I was afraid for my life. Hard to disprove, easy to claim, but what happens when that fear doesn't match the facts? This case forced the courts to ask, is fear enough, or do the facts need to back it up? The journey from tragedy to legal precedent is rarely straightforward. Rosa's parking ticket reminds us that truth is often hidden in plain sight, waiting in the details everyone else overlooks. Objective evidence, no matter how small, can anchor justice in a sea of subjective claims. And this story begins not with a bang, but with the quiet flutter of a ticket on a windshield. When tragedy strikes, victims are often reduced to headlines. But Rosa Delgado was so much more. She was a mother to Leo, a 9-year-old who built Lego castles in their living room. A daughter who called her mom every day after work. The friend who organized potlucks and remembered birthdays. Rosa was a pediatric nurse, known for calming frightened children and saving up for a Disney trip with her son. She'd just moved into a new apartment, painting Leo's room bright blue, building a new life after divorce. Fiercely independent, she balanced nursing and single motherhood with resilience. She wasn't a statistic. She was a woman with dreams, responsibilities, and a future she was building for her family. After her death, the initial narrative tried to paint her as an aggressor, erratic, threatening. But that didn't match the Rosa her loved ones knew. Every detail of her life mattered. They formed the foundation of a truth that needed to be fought for. The real Rosa stood in stark contrast to the story told by the man who ended her life. Understanding her is crucial to understanding the injustice that followed. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Rosa, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, just wanted to get home to her son. She found a tight parking spot, lightly bumped the car in front of her, a minor incident. Mark Jensen, the other car's owner, came outside. What happened next was told only through Jensen's eyes. He claimed Rosa flew into a rage, shouting, acting erratically, and threatening him. He said he retreated, warned her, and feeling his life was in danger, shot her in self-defense. For a while, this was the only story authorities had. Rosa was gone, unable to speak for herself. Jensen's account was detailed, emotional, and plausible to some. Police reports focused on Rosa's alleged aggression and Jensen's fear, a classic self-defense scenario. But to those who knew Rosa, this story was unrecognizable. The gentle nurse who calmed children wouldn't become violent over a parking mishap. Her family and friends insisted something was wrong with Jensen's story. Their conviction was the first crack in the official narrative. They knew Rosa would have been apologetic, not confrontational. Their doubts would soon find an unlikely and powerful ally. The truth was waiting in the details. To understand why Jensen's claim was so powerful, you have to know how self-defense laws worked. The core was the defendant's belief. Did they reasonably believe they were in danger? The standard was subjective. If a jury believed the defendant felt afraid, that could be enough for acquittal, even if the threat wasn't real. This imbalance was especially stark when men claimed self-defense against women. Stereotypes and biases crept in. The calm, rational man versus the hysterical woman. A man's fear could be seen as more reasonable, even if the woman was unarmed. The burden was on the prosecution to prove the defendant didn't feel afraid, an almost impossible task. This is what made Jensen's story so dangerous. The investigation seemed to follow Jensen's narrative. until Officer Miller, a meticulous detective, noticed a parking ticket on Rose's car. At first, it seemed irrelevant, but Miller logged it as evidence and checked the timestamp, 8:47 p.m. The 911 call reporting the shooting came at 9:15 p.m. That's a 28-minute gap, contradicting Jensen's claim that the confrontation happened in a frantic, continuous sequence. Rose's car was already parked when the ticket was issued. She wasn't in the middle of a heated argument. She'd been stationary long enough for a ticket to be written. The timeline Jensen described began to crumble. What happened in those 28 minutes? The ticket was a fact, solid and unchangeable in a case built on feelings. It was the first objective crack in Jensen's story. The truth was no longer just his word against Rose's silence. The trial began with Jensen's defense painting him as a terrified man forced to act. Jensen testified, voice trembling, describing Rosa as a figure of rage. His lawyer argued any reasonable person would have done the same. The prosecution struggled until Officer Miller took the stand. She described finding the parking ticket and its timestamp, 8:47 p.m. The 911 call was at 9:15 p.m., a 28-minute gap. The prosecutor asked Jensen, "If Rosa charged at you immediately, what happened during those 28 minutes?" The courtroom fell silent. The defense was caught off guard. Their case relied on a sudden, unbroken escalation. The ticket shattered that timeline. It suggested a pause. Time when Rosa was no longer a threat. Time Jensen could have de-escalated. The focus shifted from Jensen's fear to the facts. It was no longer just his word against a dead woman's silence. It was his word against the undeniable truth of 8:47 p.m. The parking ticket became the anchor for the prosecution's case. The jury now had more than a story, they had evidence. The jury convicted Mark Jensen of murder. The 28-minute gap obliterated his self-defense claim, but the case's impact was just beginning. On appeal, the court issued a landmark ruling, the Delgado precedent. The court said a defendant's belief in danger can't exist in a vacuum. It must be supported by physical evidence. The parking ticket was pivotal. From now on, I was afraid would not be enough if the facts told a different story. Prosecutors gained a new tool. They could argue that fear was unreasonable if contradicted by evidence. The burden shifted. Defense narratives had to align with reality. The Delgado precedent sent ripples through the legal community, moving self-defense law toward factual corroboration. Justice, the ruling implied, must be built on fact, not just feeling. The Delgado precedent was more than a legal adjustment. It was a step forward for women's protection. For too long, the reasonable fear standard justified violence against women, especially women of color. Now the law requires evidence-based reasonableness. A man can't claim sudden terror if a timestamp shows a half-hour lull. This shift helps dismantle stereotypes that have worked against female victims. The court must look past biased interpretations and focus on what can be proven. It gives women a better chance of being seen as they were, not as caricatures. Self-defense is a shield, not a sword. By requiring fear to be supported by facts, the law now offers greater protection and credibility to women. Even when they can't speak, the evidence can. Years later, the Delgado precedent stands as a lesson in justice. Rosa's parking ticket became a powerful symbol, a quiet fact that spoke for her when she could not. It exposed a lie and made the legal system fairer. The story highlights how society interprets women's actions and emotions. Rosa's case forced a confrontation with biases that let a man's fear outweigh a woman's life. The legal shift is a testament to challenging these narratives. Rosa Delgado was a mother, a nurse, a daughter, a friend. Her fight for justice gave her death lasting meaning. Her story ensures future victims may have their truth heard, anchored by evidence. The crumpled ticket is a symbol. No detail is too small to change the world. Rosa's legacy is a reminder to always look closer, question the narrative, and believe in the power of a single fact.